Hey everybody, this is Will Chow from Will's Personal Development Show, and today I'm here with Jeremy Jong. He is a relationship coach for Asian men, and he has a fascinating story that I think could provide a lot of value to all my listeners. And so, without further ado, uh, great to have you here, Jeremy.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm really excited to just shoot the shit with you as well as chat and share more about myself.
Awesome. So I want to start off with your story. Can you give us your stories, where you started out, what struggles you faced, and where you're at now?
Of course. So I kind of started at rock bottom. And I think a lot of guys, they're used to hearing this from like a relationship slash dating coach. But growing up, I grew up in a very Asian neighborhood in LA. My high school was 70% Asian. And like most of the Asian listeners that probably experienced this, I played violin and piano. So I was very, very, very academic, very focused on the typical Asian activities. My parents and my family was also very Christian, so I grew up very religious. And growing up, I had always just kind of followed what my parents told me. It was all about, getting a good job by going to a good college. And the thing is this, I had stumbled across personal development in high school because one of my friends, he shared with me different dating books, and that's kind of what sparked my interest. But in college, I didn't realize anxious how socially not confident I was until college happened. I actually had terrible social anxiety for around 2 to 3 years in college. I was scared of, being seen in public. I was scared of crossing the street because I thought people would make fun of how I was walking, how I looked. I was scared of walking around campus because I thought everyone was looking at me. Basically, that feeling of like hearing someone laugh and thinking they're laughing about you, that would make my face turn red with embarrassment. Needless to say, I was so scared to the point that even going to a club meeting where everyone wants to make new friends, looking someone in the eye and reaching my hand out and saying, "Hey, I'm Jeremy," that was almost impossible for me to do. I was so scared. And my breaking point really occurred around my third year of college because there I had not been to a college party. And as you know, they say college is the time to party it up. And I was also still really Christian. So I was very conflicted because I wanted to get girls, I wanted to hook up with girls, but I felt a lot of sexual shame as a Christian. But I remember just hearing the sounds of people going off to a party or parties on Thursday night. And I remember just feeling like, what the fuck is up with my life? Why am I sitting here? And I remember thinking, oh, it's because you're ugly, Jeremy. No woman would want you. And at that point in time, I reached my breaking point. I just thought, you know what? Fuck it. If I go out there and talk to girls and they reject me, if everyone rejects me, that's okay. Because worst case scenario, I prove myself right, that I'm not good enough and not good looking enough. But best case scenario, I actually may be wrong. And I feel like this insight was instrumental because up until then, I was still really scared of people. And what happened is I consistently challenged these fears until eventually, I did hook up with a few girls in college. I did kind of get out of my shell. There was still a lot of growing pains. A lot of people would feel like my life became better, and it did. However, out of college, became another dry spell. I became very deep into the pickup movement. I was going out 3 to 5 times a week. I was trying every tactic. I actually had mentors that were the best in the industry at the time. I won't name them because I don't think they want to be associated with it anymore. However, what happened is even though I got some results 2 years out of college, I had very little results to show for it. I had like a one night stand. I kissed one girl and I went on one date. And that was the extent of it. And it wasn't for lack of trying. And meanwhile, I was working my ass off in my career. I was working 12-hour days. I was getting paid around $30,000 a year. And I was really conflicted too because I was like, hey, should I focus on career or my dating life? I want to have both at the same time, but I'm so exhausted because I'm working 12-hour days. I'm going out 3 to 5 times a week. I'm hustling and nothing is happening. And I was so, so frustrated. And this is actually where the story got better because I focused on career, but that gave me the confidence. It gave me the permission to feel confident. And I actually started taking care of myself better. I felt more confident. I started attracting a lot more women. And eventually one girl became my girlfriend. But as you guys will hear in my story, it seems to like always go up and down. And the girlfriend that I had at the time, I'll put it this, emotionally, we were both very immature. I was a nice guy, meaning I let women walk over me. By that, I mean, I let her walk over me. She wasn't over her ex. She would do a lot of shady shit, like texting other guys, having Snapchats from other guys and claiming it was nothing, being in contact with her ex. But then she'd get angry at me because she thought I was cheating on her, vice versa. I mean, it's actually very cringeworthy as I mention it, and it kind of makes me laugh. But I was basically a doormat. And eventually I broke that off because I was just so tired of the emotional roller coaster. And from there on, what happened is I actually really invested heavily into my personal development. I started boxing. I started working out like fucking crazy. I actually invested money in dating coaches and therapists, and my career went up again. And this is actually a period of time where it became very easy to hook up with girls. And another challenge that I kind of ran into is women seem to like my body and like fooling around with me, but they're never going to stay around. And eventually through self-work, I started attracting more quality women that wanted to stay around until I eventually met my current girlfriend. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell. And it kind of, hopefully it kind of illuminates all the challenges that I had to face. And one more thing I actually do want to mention is keep in mind, even though it's a very linear story, there's a lot of shit I had to work through, because even when I was dating a lot of girls and hooking up with a lot of girls, I had really terrible anxiety still. So by no means do I want to paint it as if I'm perfect, as if everything was good. Because during that time, I had built my confidence on always becoming the most career successful man in the room, or becoming the man that was the best at meeting women in the room. And I was still based in this like self-comparison cycle of always trying to be the best. And I had to work through that with a therapy sessions rather, as well as with coaches, because I realized it started to give me terrible anxiety to the point I was having panic attacks. So I want to share all of that because a lot of times I think coaches, we kind of paint the story of like, oh, I sucked and then I became better. But the reality is it almost felt like a little bit of a cycle or spiral where even though I improved my life, there's always stuff I was working on. So I do want to impart that to your listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very interesting story, especially the whole spiral thing. I think it's definitely true that sometimes people will paint their success like I was bad and now I'm perfect at everything, and that's often not so true. So I want to touch on the first topic that we want to cover, which is shame. And I think this is a very interesting topic because many Asian men in dating, their biggest issue may be shame, but they don't think it is. They think it's like a magic pickup line or, not having confidence. So can you talk more about shame and why this matters?
Absolutely. I think to define shame, I know a lot of people think like, does it mean being ashamed? Not exactly. Shame is a state of not feeling like you're good enough. So I want to define that as shame. And the reason why a lot of Asian guys suffer from shame is due to the fact that and by that I mean Asian American men, or you can also be in Canada, I guess. But if you grow up with immigrant parents, their society and the way we're raised is very shame-based. It's about not losing face. There are literally phrases in different Asian languages about not losing face. For example, my parents are Taiwanese/Chinese, and there's like, don't lose face. And I think what happens is these Asian American guys, including me, were taught to not lose face, to always look good. And what happens is a lot of Asian American men or Asian men, they develop a coping mechanism to get love. And the coping mechanism is by listening to my parents, by being a good member of society, by achieving, I will get love. And what happens is this script kind of covers every part of their life. That's why so many Asian guys were very career focused. And I do want to say for the guys who are saying like, oh, is Jeremy saying don't be career focused and don't get women and just be a fucking hippie? I'm not saying that. It's about where it comes from. But for a lot of Asian guys in their dating lives, what happens is they kind of stumble upon a lot of dating advice, namely pickup advice. And the reason why it's so appealing is because they're treating it as another thing to perform and get good at. But it does nothing to fix that core wound of not feeling like they're good enough. They are literally layering another type of coping mechanism to make themselves feel better. It's very similar to if someone overeats or smokes to make themselves feel better. Like, sure, it's taking care of that feeling of not feeling good temporarily, but you're still killing yourself slowly. And the same thing goes for guys. Yes, it is nice to have sex with a lot of hot girls. It is nice to have girls tell you like you're awesome in bed or whatever. And there is value in having some of that. But if you don't fix that core sense of not feeling good enough, you will be like an addict, always chasing another fix in your career, in your relationships, like, being highly prized in your relationships, the status of it, and or with women. And a lot of guys, again, suffer from this because that's the way they got love growing up with Asian parents that raised them in a very shame-based culture. And they don't realize that the script of not feeling good enough and using achievements to feel good enough is still running in the background.
Awesome. Can you talk about the lack of emotional range that Asian men struggle with?
Absolutely. This kind of ties to shame because I think for a lot of Asian guys, the thing I notice when coaching them is they feel very stifled, especially around their parents and people. They don't feel like they can express themselves authentically. And the reason why this happens is due to the fact that, again, it kind of goes back to Asian parents and the way we're raised. A lot of Asian households, immigrant households, do not stress emotional intelligence. It's about shutting the fuck up and about like doing your work and getting good grades, going to a good college, getting a good career. But it's never about really being happy and successful. And the thing I might want to pass on, or I'm going to pass on, is I remember there were studies that, and again, I don't know if this is just hearsay, I'm making stuff up based on what I heard, but some people have told me they did studies between American parents and Asian parents. And by the way, this is not supposed to incite a debate about which one's better. But when they asked the parents, American parents, like, what do you want your kids to be when they grow up? American parents said happy, but Asian parents said successful. And what happens is when Asian kids are only focused on success, that emotional intelligence gets looked over. For example, for me, my mom told me my social life should come from my school projects. And this is not to like knock her again, but it's really about letting people know that I know what it's like to have your social life and emotional intelligence not emphasized, because again, everything is based on achievement. And what happens is for a lot of Asian guys, because their households are not emotionally supportive and expressive, and in general, Asian households tend to be a little bit more stoic, and it's about, not looking bad. So if you're like crying or like showing weakness and all that stuff, it's very frowned upon. And what happens is a lot of Asian guys, they create that shame, they internalize their emotions, they numb and suppress their emotions. What happens is they adopt that performance mentality of using these pickup tactics or dating advice tactics to try to replicate what an attractive man says or does, but they don't actually feel it. And I think a lot of women can sense that misalignment, especially women that are more emotionally attuned and aligned with, what guys are doing, the more conscious women, so to speak. And I think a lot of guys don't realize it. And this is why it's so hard for a lot of Asian guys, is because you can give them the tactics and everything, but if they don't actually feel it and mean it, women are very attuned to sensing when a guy is just making shit up. And I think that's why a lot of Asian guys struggle, is because, their childhood is filled with just achieving and suppressing their emotions to the point they have literally developed a habit of not feeling and not expressing themselves.
Absolutely. I think that, emotional intelligence and social intelligence are huge. And it's definitely something that many Asian men I've seen, including myself, have avoided or not really emphasized until we see the problems that arise in our dating life and career life when they occur. And so I think it's incredibly important for success, and yet so often neglected. And that's a good segue to the next issue that you mentioned that Asian men really struggle with, which is being too logical. Can you talk about what this is and why this occurs?
Yeah, it's another way of going about life. At the very core of life and how people act in life and the results they get, it's a habit, it's a pattern, whether a thought and or emotional pattern. And I think for a lot of Asian guys, the reason why we're so technical growing up doctor and lawyers, partly because our parents push us into it, but that's the way we approach life. We've been groomed to approach life that way. Think with our head, not feeling with our heart. And what happens is, because we're used to solving problems that way, we try to apply a logical solution as if we were solving an algorithm or solving a business problem. And we try to apply that thinking way of thinking over to an emotional issue, such as, how do I feel about myself? Why am I not happy? Why are women not responding to me? And this is going to mess them up because, come to think of it, if you think about it logically, which is kind of ironic, trying to solve a logical, actually, let me rephrase that. Trying to solve an emotional issue via logic doesn't make sense. But a lot of Asian guys are still going about it that way because they're used to thinking logically. And I want to actually dive a little bit more into this because I know it might be making sense in theory, but I want to share a story. Back when I was hooking up with a lot of girls, this is definitely a time where I very much objectified my dating life. And I remember thinking, I had literally a spreadsheet. I know this makes me sound like a weirdo, but I bet you a lot of Asian guys out there have like an approach spreadsheet and like how many girls they met and had sex with. I think a lot of guys actually in the pickup community do that shit. But I remember thinking like, okay, with these variables of how I met the girl, was it during the daytime or nighttime? Was it through online dating? Was she a white girl or whatever, like an Asian girl or whatever it was, right? Like I was trying to run, it was basically like I was trying to run big data on my dating life. However, coincidentally, when I started to go with that formula, I was still approaching it logically, right? I was like, okay, if I just approach enough X women, right? Like let's say Latin women, enough times during the daytime, I will eventually get a girlfriend or, I'll be honest, sleep with enough of them. But I actually noticed during this time, things got worse. And I'm like, oh, what's happening? Why is my formula not working? Eventually, I had to stop doing that. And I just kind of meditated and gave myself space and realized like, actually, whether or not I realized it, I'm still very needy. And even though it's not overt neediness, there was still that desire to make women the source of my happiness and comfort. And this is a prime example of how Asian guys like me can use our head to solve problems, but they might miss the fact that it's an emotional thing that's stifling them most likely in their dating and love life. And that the way to really have that felt sense, that wisdom of what's plaguing them, is to actually stop thinking so much and to really start feeling, to make space in their mind, to really allow themselves to feel into their body and feel what their truth is. And this actually takes practice too, because it's not like you can just switch your mind off if you're used to using it all the time in your life.
Yeah, that's definitely pretty deep there. I definitely have faced similar situations. So we have these three issues: shame, lack of emotional range, and being too logical. What are your top tips for taking action on these so that we can overcome them?
Yeah, I would say there's a few tips. The first tip is do not hesitate to get a therapist. And this is something, honestly, I'll be completely frank. There are some clients I had in the past where I should not have been their coach. They should have been seeing a therapist, because it's really hard to get someone results in their love life if they continually don't feel like they're good enough, if they're not in touch with their emotions, if they're way too logical and way too cerebral to the point that they can't actually connect with women. So number one is there is no shame in therapy. If you want to feel more, to get more in your body and to really heal your shame, definitely go to therapy. The second thing I would say is have good people around you. This is very cliche, but for you to really feel like you're good enough and lovable is to actually get experiences with safe and supportive people that are able to listen to you, be there when you're down, and to actually hear shit about yourself that you don't want to share with other people, which leads to the third point is be willing to share the uncomfortable shit about yourself with these people. Because when you really do that and you have the experience again of people really caring for you, that really heals the shame. The fourth thing I would say is really focus on connecting with women. I think a lot of guys, the reason why they're so logical is because there's a little bit of this weird paradigm of like, women are like a puzzle to be solved. And it's focused in this like paradigm of, I need to acquire women. I need to figure it out so I can get women. that word is key, get women. The reality is women already like men. Women want to have sex with men. Women want relationships with men. And I think a lot of guys, the reason why they suffer is because they're in this weird state where they feel like they need to figure out women and get women instead of understanding that connection between a man and a woman is natural. So for a guy that's kind of in a state where he's really in your head, really filled with shame and kind of trying to figure out his way, I would say actually just focus on connecting with women, getting to know them, really understanding them by experience, and normalizing your relationships with them will be very key. I want to stress this point a lot because I think a lot of guys that get into pickup become really freaking weird because it still feels like they're trying to get women to women. And it's almost like that feeling of if you're walking on a street and a bum comes up to you and like is trying to small talk you, but you know he just wants your money. It's the same feeling. And I think women, especially generally speaking, they're evolved to be very sensitive to the intentions of men because, again, it's for their safety. And also people claim it's due to the fact that they have to take care of babies biologically. And I think a lot of guys don't understand how that nervous, desperate, logical energy is such a turnoff to women instead of really connecting with women. So that would be my advice. Another piece I actually want to mention too is, and there's one thing that you really work on in terms of improving your dating life. It's really about healing that shame and building confidence, because I think a lot of guys are trying to do attraction and do tactics, but naturally when you feel good about yourself and come from a place of confidence and wholeness, results with women are basically a byproduct of that. So that's kind of what I would want to pass on to the men that want to improve this part of their life in a very healthy manner.
Yeah, I definitely want to emphasize a couple points you just mentioned because I think they're really important and worth not forgetting. I think one of the things you said about how women are they're emotionally intuitive, and it's important to connect with them and kind of be your own man and confident and rather than needy and dependent on them for happiness. I think is so important, and yet many men just don't really understand or don't really feel for. So that was huge. And then that other point about how it's so crucial to really consider to see if you actually need a coach or a therapist, which is something that I emphasize a lot in my content too. And so I think the next question I have for you is, how exactly do you define, should you be in therapy or should you get some type of coach?
Yeah, I think it goes into just looking at the symptoms that you have, not just in your love life, because a lot of guys are saying like, I don't feel good around women, blah, 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 I must get a dating coach. But a lot of times it goes into like, well, you don't feel good around women, but in general, do you not feel good about your life in general? And I do want to say for a lot of guys listening, if you don't feel good in general about yourself, if you don't feel like you're good enough, if you feel like you're constantly comparing yourself against other people, if you feel a lot of anxiety and depression in your life, or to the point that it feels like it's controlling you instead of you handling it, and if you feel like you always need to become the best as well as perform in your life, there's a high chance that that mentality is not just in your dating life, it's probably in your career and everything else. So in general, if you're an anxious and or depressed and or unhappy person, not just in your love life, you probably need a therapist compared to a dating coach. Because the problem with getting a dating coach when you're in that level is when you come from that place of like not feeling good about yourself, it's infinitely more difficult to get you results. I've been there as a dating coach, relationship coach, where guys should have had therapists, and every time we made progress, they would backslide. And I was just thinking like, man, this is actually someone I shouldn't be coaching. And I will fess up to making that mistake. And the other thing is this, even if the dating coach is able to somehow MacGyver you and get you results, it still doesn't fix the core issue of the fact that you might hate yourself, you might not like yourself. And then the weird thing is actually you start to use pickup or getting women or having sex with women as a way to make yourself feel better. And a lot of actually dating coaches fall into this sphere where they are addicted to the validation from women. They are addicted to the validation from their fanboys saying like, oh my God, I can't believe you slept with that girl. And they become this emotional roller coaster themselves, whether or not they admit it. And that's actually a hidden secret for a lot of dating coaches in this industry. I'll say it right now is, yes, we are all human and we have our own flaws, but a lot of these dating coaches are really fucked up emotionally. And this is not to say that I'm perfect, but I'm going to straight up say it right here. And I just hate how, and this is me kind of going on a rant, but I just hate how so many of these coaches act like they're spiritually superior. Like, oh, let me tell you the spiritual way to get women. But I'm just thinking, you're so full of shit. And like the women that you're with or the way you treat women is fucking psycho. And I want to say, like, again, some guys at this point, they might be listening and saying, well, fuck you, Jeremy. I'm going to go to that coach that'll teach me how to sleep with lots of women. And I'm saying, good riddance, go and do that. But if you don't fix that thing, you can still get a lot of women, but that does not mean you're going to be happy. That does not mean that you're going to be confident. That does not mean you're going to be happy and fulfilled. And mark my words on that.
Absolutely. I think that's so awesome that you're willing to say that, because a lot of people aren't willing to speak the truth because they're trying to make money and they want to become a coach, even though that's not the best thing for their students. And I believe that in the long run, if you tell the truth and you bring that value, they're going to trust you more and you're going to make more money by being honest and guiding them to people who will help them, even if it's not you initially. And you know, with what you said with emotionally unstable people, I think it's definitely something that's where people who are, you know, not stable and secure in themselves tend to attract other people who are toxic and so forth, and that just kind of perpetuates. So I definitely agree a lot with your therapy thing. This is something that I'm investigating and getting into myself. I think therapy is something that a lot of people listening might feel like it's shameful, or that, oh, it puts a label on you that you're a crazy person. But that, I definitely don't think that's true. I think, you know, you could be a pretty awesome person that just needs a little bit of help in the areas of shame or anxiety or some other area that you're really struggling with, that you can get professional research back help with. And that leads me to my question of, you know, how do you decide which therapist is good and which one is, you know, maybe not so good and just there to, you know, take your money? Because I definitely experienced the latter once. I was in college, and this lady who was my therapist for a few sessions, all she did was say, like, what you see on TV, which is just, how does that make you feel? And she would spend the whole hour just saying that. And it was not a good use of my time. And my only regret was not telling her when I left, like, that this was not helpful. I told her that it was useful, and I lied to be nice. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Dude, that is a really good point. I would say this: if you want to find a good therapist, it's a little bit complicated, because just because a therapist didn't get you results, by the way, this is not me knocking you well, it doesn't mean they're a bad therapist, but it might mean that they weren't the best fit for you and or you weren't ready yet. But I'll try to deconstruct this. Number one is, do your research on the therapies available. There's a lot of different modalities. Honestly, there's a shit ton, so go with what feels right to you initially. The second thing I would say is really read the reviews. It is ideal that you pick a therapist that has a very specific focus in the areas that you need help in. There are some therapists that do more generic, like feel better about life and stuff. But luckily, there's a lot of therapists that might focus on anxiety if anxiety is your issue, among other things. Or some people might really focus on depression or panic disorder. Whatever it is, I would recommend you to really hone in on that and really deconstruct what you're facing and find the best therapist for that based on what people are reviewing them for. For me, to give a practical tip, I used to go to Yelp and just kind of look and search in the reviews, like anxiety, and seeing if they were helpful. Because some therapists will be too generic, and unfortunately, for me, that's not good enough, because I don't know if they can actually help me, even if they can. The third thing I would say is, do not hesitate to get on the phone with a therapist. Before you even pay money, I think it's very important for you to ask questions like, what is your modality? Can you give me examples? It's almost like if you're going to pay a business money, you want to make sure that they have good reviews and that their stuff works. So don't hesitate to do that. If a therapist is not willing to do that or makes you pay, you can probably find another therapist. There's plenty of them out there. So definitely do not hesitate to ask the tough questions so you can understand how they're going to help you and examples to see if they actually have helped people with their issues. The other thing I would say is don't commit to anything long term. And as a coach slash, I wouldn't say I'm a therapist. I'm not trained in that area. But as a coach, part of me, of course, we don't want to say like, oh, only pay for a few sessions. But don't be afraid to try it out for a little bit. But be willing to analyze your progress and then move on if it's not working for you. If a therapist, I know like this might suck for the therapists out there, but if a therapist is trying to like goad you into like a 3-month package, 6-month package, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't do this, but I'm saying if you're not sure, you want to just try things out, go for a therapist that will allow you to like try it out for a month or even like one session. So you can actually see if you're making progress. And for me, I stand by this because I always want my clients, from my experience, and again, I'm not a therapist, I want them to feel free. I want them to be able to assess their progress. And if a therapist is just trying to get money out of you, you're going to be able to sense that. So those would be the tips I would give to a guy that are really like willing to do the work. And that's how you find a therapist that actually works with you and helps you instead of just paying a lot of money and getting really shit results. Because one more thing, I got too excited, I hit something. But one more thing I do want to say is a therapist that may work for one person may not work for you. And a lot of this is actually about finding the right therapist for you. So do not be willing to try different ones out because you are not trapped. You do not have to stick with one therapist. You can have multiple at a time, or you can choose and switch over each month, whatever works for you. So do not be afraid to switch things up if things are not working.
Those are some great tips. I want to transition to the next question, which is, can you talk about being versus doing and how that will help your dating life?
Yeah, absolutely. And for the guys that might be wondering about it, like being versus doing, like, okay, so you be what? We're talking about mainly how to actually become an attractive guy versus trying to do attraction. And this is kind of taken from a podcast I did recently on Honest Casanovas, as they're called. So I want to give them credit. But the whole point is a lot of guys are trying to do attraction. They're trying to use the tactics. So the difference between being versus doing is a lot of guys are trying to fake it. This is where they do attraction. This is where they try to use tactics. This is where they try to use a lot of different tactics to really get women. And the thing is, this might apply to you if you feel like you read all the dating advice literature out there and you have some results or very little results, but it's still not working. The difference between being and doing is that the former is based on becoming an attractive man who naturally attracts women, but the latter is based on performance. And for the latter, in terms of doing, this is why a lot of Asian guys do not succeed in dating, is because they find pickup and they try to apply the tactics. They're doing the tactics, but they're getting very shit results. And I think, honestly, to be completely honest with a lot of the Asian guys out there, or any men that are listening to this, if you're trying so many different tactics and it's not working, it's probably because you're not yet at a level where women find you attractive. You're trying to layer on tactics to your foundation of confidence that is not yet attractive to women. And your issue is not a doing issue, because if it was just a matter of being more socially smooth, you would have results. Being is really about working on yourself, healing yourself, so you become that strong, grounded, confident, powerful man who's comfortable in his skin, who's comfortable expressing himself sexually to women and connecting with women. This is when you actually become a man that naturally attracts women in your life. And this is actually what worked for me, because let me tell you, when I was deep in the midst of low confidence, low self-esteem, like panic disorder and anxiety, I tried all the pickup stuff, right? I would go out 3 to 5 times a week. I had the best mentors in the industry at that time. And it kind of worked, but no matter what, it would inevitably fail. And I want to say to these guys, the reason why who you are is the most important thing is because you can't hide from yourself. It's like putting on a performance. You can act like you're the shit. You can act like you're the life of the party and people respect you. And you can keep layering and layering more and more tactics. But eventually, who you are is always going to shine through. And a lot of guys have false confidence because, again, for Asian guys, It's based on the status, their performance. But eventually you got to stop acting unless you want to keep acting the rest of your life. And that for me, I personally found it very exhausting. And eventually I thought, man, this shit's stupid. Like I'm trying so hard, but it's not working. And that's when I stumbled upon actually working on myself and actually caring and loving myself and being expressive and shameless in who I was and what I wanted with women and connecting with women. And that's when the results really happened.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So how does one actually get started with building that foundation? Is this a matter of going to the gym or internal work of some sort with a therapist, or is it about becoming more handsome or stylish or working on your career?
It's all the above, but I would say I want to point to the principles behind the tactics. If whatever you're doing to yourself or for yourself is reinforcing that you matter, then you're on the right track. This includes how you talk to yourself. This includes your actions, your eating habits. This includes how you view yourself. This is also tied to how you treat other people, because oftentimes the way we judge others is how we judge ourselves. If everything you're doing for yourself is to build yourself up, then you're on the right track. Different examples could be like meditating, going to the gym, actually going to a therapist, seeing what core emotional wounds are holding you back. As long as you're working on yourself and building yourself up, that's the only thing you can really do. The reason why I don't want to go specifically into tactics is because guys might take it too literally, but I really want to point to the principle of if you are really building up your sense of self, that's what really matters. And there are a lot of different ways to get to, however you want to call it, the end result. But as long as it's really reinforcing the fact that you're taking care of yourself and that you're valuing yourself, that's what really matters.
Right. I think that's very important. That's actually what Dr. Robert Glover says in his book, No More Mr. Nice Guy. He says many nice guys just don't do anything for themselves. And if you just take some time to, do something for yourself, even if it's unproductive, like watching a movie or a game of golf, I think it will really help yourself love yourself more and help you become more mentally healthy. My next question for you is about how an Asian man can kind of overcome all the obstacles like unique to them. I think a lot of listeners are Asian American men, and they're young and they're trying to figure this world out. So there's a lot of tips and information that you've given us, but if they can only remember one big thing, what would it be?
I would say this, and I know this might be more of an esoteric point, but you already have everything within yourself to become successful, and you already are attracted to women. Even though you may not believe it yet, a lot of this is about unlearning the bad habits, the shame, the lack of emotional expression that holds you back. But when you release those blockages and really trust and love yourself, that's when your world will change. And that's already within you.
Wow, that's deep, and it's short, concise, and to the point. I like it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think some of our listeners may be taking some of this stuff in, and they're definitely analytical guys. So one thing I do want to emphasize before we round out this podcast is, can you talk a little bit more about how you can become more emotionally connective and tap into that side? Because I feel like a lot of listeners might be confused about that because they come from such a logical background and history. Like what they might hear, like, oh yeah, you want to connect with women, and have no idea what that means. Does that mean like talking to women about their emotions or their experiences? Can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think the answer that's coming to me is two things. For you to connect with women, you have to connect with yourself first. Because you could fake connection and all that shit, but it's just not going to feel right or aligned. And eventually the girl's going to leave your ass because you're not actually connected with her, or she's going to find out you're not the man that she thought you were, unless she's messed up herself and has low self-esteem and other issues. But connecting with yourself is pretty simple, not easy, by the way, but it can be simple. It's about shutting off your logical brain, because a lot of Asian guys are logical. And the way to kind of shut off your brain, there's a lot of different modalities, but meditation is one, to really realize that you're not your thoughts. The other thing is to actually, whenever you feel triggered or whenever you feel like upset or angry or not good, try to actually take deep breaths and really feel where you're feeling it in your body. And this will help you kind of reintegrate how you're feeling to your thoughts. Because a lot of guys, actually, there's a split between how they're feeling and what they're thinking, or they're not sure why they're feeling the way they're thinking. Namely, they're like, okay, I have thoughts, I'm upset, and they just live in a world of reaction. But when you're able to kind of pause and really feel like, oh, shoot, what thoughts are coming up? Okay, those are just thoughts. And really feel in your body how it's responding in your body. That will give you a lot more awareness to what thoughts are triggering what sensations. And you'll also have more attunement to where different emotions show up in your body. For example, when someone has a lot of heartbreak, right? That shows up in their heart, understandably. So a lot of times when someone hears like terrible news, it's like they're being punched in their gut. But being able to really feel these things fully, by the way, I want to say being able to feel fully is really critical, because if you suppress that emotion and that energy, what happens is it warps and it becomes repressed, and it's going to fuck with you down the road. So really being able to feel fully, being able to locate in your body and observe your thoughts is really key to connecting with yourself. When it comes to connecting with women, though, if you're like, oh, how do I connect with women? I will say it very simply. It's about just being yourself. I know that sounds generic, but it's about sharing who you are, being honest about who you are, sharing your stories, being curious about her, asking her about herself, seeing if you two are a good fit. That's the best way, I think, to connect with women that are right for you. Yes, there are tactics out there to fake connection and to make shit up. I probably could do it if I wanted to, but I find it very exhausting. But when you are being honest and sharing yourself and having her share herself to you, naturally connection occurs between the right women for you. And to kind of impart what one of my friends said, what if connection and attraction wasn't entirely up to you? And that's the question I want to pose to the guys listening, because what if by sharing yourself and learning more about herself, the universe, God, or whatever other forces at work would bring the right women into your life? How much easier would that make your life? And for the guys listening, I do want to stress this, because honestly, when you come from this place of wholeness and curiosity and seeing if she's a good fit, you'll find that you connect with women that are better for you instead of always trying to make things work, trying to force that energy.
Wow, that was really deep. I love that whole idea of, stop trying to logically and formulaically, make things work, and just, kind of attract the right energy. So is there any place you want to refer people if they want to learn more about you?
Absolutely. I would recommend them to go to my website, fearlessasianmen.com. Let me repeat that, Fearless Asian Men, as in MEN. And over there, the thing to look for is there's free guides on confidence in dating, as well as a way to join my Facebook tribe and community, where you can join your Asian brothers in becoming a stronger man that has better relationships with higher quality women. And that's kind of the best way to keep in touch. And I also recommend guys, if they got questions, feel free to email me via my website, or actually kind of connect to my Facebook page and send me questions. I do want to give them that offer, because I always value relationships as opposed to just like shouting down information to people. So for the guys listening, don't hesitate to do that.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on board here, Jeremy.
Well, thank you so much for interviewing me. It was a great talk, and I hope the guys listening got a lot out of it.